It's fine when the only speakers come from that. Okay, so I don't need to present that. We don't have any more speakers. So you can walk back on one of
حتما ضبط میکنه دیگه نه باید جان.
But we are still
نه پس خودم باید آقای بیژن کیان خودم نزدیک بگیرم.
Okay, people, can we start? Yes.
آقای جان صدای منو دارید حالا؟
Thank you.
It's okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
They haven't looked up there. Like you just heard. Absolutely. No, my Zoom first. I know you have to leave dot of one, so I'm not forgetting that. We'll manage so that you leave that dot of one.
یه اینجا بشین.
She did. Yeah, she did. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. Welcome to everyone who's joining us now live on YouTube as well. Apologies for us not being able to be connected earlier. We will certainly upload everything that you have missed. We heard some very powerful presentations this morning. But without further ado, we will carry on with the panel, and we have to finish dot at 1 o'clock because our esteemed speaker, Dr. Payal Mahavan, has to fly to Oslo to participate in the Nobel ceremony tomorrow. We are happy that the Nobel Peace Prize is coming home again to Iran, to an Iranian woman activist, Narges Mohammadi, and so we have to finish dot at 1 p.m. London time to allow him to be there. Now, we have the Right Honourable Bijan Kian. We are very honoured to have you with us, sir. Thank you for staying up at this unearthly hour in California. Bijan Kian is twice confirmed by the Senate of the United States. He's a former senior official of the United States government. He served as deputy lead for the Office of Director of National Intelligence in President Trump's presidential transition team in 2016 to 17. His public statements and publications reflect his own personal opinion. He's here talking to us on a very interesting testimony that he's been in interrogation. He will tell us more about it, and then hopefully we can investigate it more in the question and answers. So, Bijan, thank you very much for bearing with us with all our technical problems. We're very grateful that we see you smiling back at us and not angry with us. And we look forward to hearing your presentation. You have 10 minutes, sir.
Well, Roya John, thank you so much for inviting me, but I also like to thank the organizers, the Association of Iranian Researchers, and your distinguished speakers for sharing their thoughts this morning. Yes, it's my pleasure to join you 4 o'clock in the morning in California. Good morning, London. I'd like to add to that introduction that you so kindly provided for me to say that I'm a volunteer at the Institute for Voices of Liberty. Institute for Voices of Liberty has a political identity which follows the will of what we call freedom-seeking people of Iran, those who renounce and reject the entirety of the institution of Islamic Republic and its constitution and its related institutions, those who believe in preservation of territorial integrity and cultural diversity of Iran, and those who believe in a government by the people, for the people, based on 4 principles of consent, participation, equality, not of income or assets, but equality of opportunities, and most importantly, freedom to choose. Meaning, if they said yes yesterday to anything, they should be able to say no any day, according to the law. So with that introduction, I'd like to say that, previous speakers talked about militarization of 2 regions of Iran, Sistan and Baluchistan and Kurdistan. Today, I'm not going to spend the time reciting plenty of evidence on why there is such a level of poverty in the region of Sistan and Baluchistan. Instead, I'm going to focus on why. Why is this government in the past 44 years has been continuously militarizing this region? And I would like to do this in describing it in 3 scenes. By the way, this is not a fairy tale. It's not stories made up by people who are fed up with the tyranny of Islamic Republic. What I'm about to share with you is a personal testimony of an eyewitness from inside Iran, very close to the system. Very soon, this confidential source will come and join you and others to tell the story that I'm about to tell you. Scene 1 starts from the end of the Iran-Iraq War. Qasem Soleimani was not the sharpest knife in the kitchen in the war. There were others who had more military victories, who had more in their resumes to boast about. Qasem Soleimani was not one of them. He was from Kerman. He was sent back to Kerman to lead the IRGC unit there. Well, the neighboring province of Sistan and Baluchistan needed also a representative in IRGC, and the government does not trust people who were in the IRGC from Sistan and Baluchistan to be in command of the forces in that region. They asked Qasem Soleimani to go there and take over that region. Soon after that, Qasem Soleimani found out, it was so obvious he didn't have to find out, it was right there for him to see, that 40% of all the opium probably in the region, probably in the world, enters through the border with Afghanistan and Pakistan, in Iran, and exits through the Kurdistan region in the West. He was not a businessman. He didn't know. He was trained in perhaps leading young people to their deaths carelessly. He had no military training. He had no education in military tactic or strategy. And even worse than that, he had no idea about the economics of anything. So at this time, he is now aided by another so-called general from the IRGC. I mean, these people, as you all may know, became generals with 1 stars and 2 stars at age 19. And this other 19-year-old general was none other than a person who sits today as the Speaker of the Parliament, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. Apparently, he had a sense for business, and he was sent by those who made the decisions in and around decision makers at the time to aid Qasem Soleimani in turning a crisis into an opportunity. The crisis was the uncontrollable opium trade. And the controls that they wished to put in place was to somehow benefit from this. So Ghalibaf joins Qasem Soleimani, and together they go to Mr. Khamenei, the so-called supreme leader of the Islamic Republic. And they present a case to him. And that case is the following: that, we are about to fund Quds Force. Quds Force is the external arm of IRGC with a charter and a mission to blow things up and kill people. It needs a budget. The budget, we cannot take it to the parliament, present it to the deputies, and ask them to approve a budget to kill people and blow things up. We need money. So why don't we control the opium trade to be able to create a source of revenue? Now, we're talking about the actors in this: Qasem Soleimani, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, and Khamenei himself, who endorsed this plan to further convince him that this is a good idea, and perhaps he didn't need any convincing to do because he was thinking about solving the problem, funding the Quds Force. They said this opium is going to exit through Kurdistan into Europe and make young Europeans addicted to opium, and this would be a great victory for Islam. So this reasoning was very, very appetizing for Khamenei, and he personally approved the plan. And with that, we saw the continuation of a charade later on, even endorsed by the State Department in the United States in 2001. There was a big, big fanfare about how the government of Islamic Republic is cooperating with the government of the United States in curbing the trade of opium in the region. This report is public, and it's accessible by anyone who's interested to read it. It leaves the question of where did the information come from? How was it validated? Who investigated this cooperation and the results that it produced? Was it for political expediency that a report was published to show, that the IRGC is cooperating with the United States government in an anti-narcotics mission? Was there any truth to it? Well, I'm going to fast forward to just a few months ago, where the daughter of Qasem Soleimani discusses the personal story of how the #1 smuggler in the region was a regular guest at lunches in their home. This is not a bunch of dissidents outside of Iran talking about this. It's Qasem Soleimani's daughter, Zainab, who's telling the story. You've perhaps heard that story directly from her. She's describing a close relationship between the number one smuggler, the man by the name of Iduk Averi, and Qasem Soleimani. And that's really telling as to what was going on. The glorious report from the State Department says that this cooperation was so successful that the trade was reduced, and this was an amazing cooperation and success, and builds it as if it was a real effort to reduce the volume of opium entering Iran. Well, evidence shows something else. What we have in front of us is not only the confession by the daughter of Qasem Soleimani that a relationship existed there, but also looking at the question of funding the Quds Force. Where did the money come from? That is a question that needs to be asked. The second scene that I like to describe is what happened next. What happened next was systematic corruption allowed Qasem Soleimani and Ghalibaf. These are just two of them. I'm sure they share the wealth with others within this institutionalized corruption in Iran. But they built a fortune. Part of the money from the opium trade was spent by Ghalibaf in his campaign for the post of the mayor of the city of Tehran. The rest was deposited in charitable foundations, today run by Zainab Soleimani, the daughter of Qasem Soleimani, and the wife of Mohammad Baqir Ghalibaf. And if you're asking yourself, where does Ms. Zainab Soleimani get millions of dollars to donate to Lebanon's Hezbollah and others? Perhaps Islamic Jihad, maybe Hamas. Where does she get the money? Did she earn it through some particular skills, or did the money come from the opium from across the border? So these are the questions that need to be really looked at seriously. The point is, the government of Islamic Republic has been intentionally depriving the people of Sistan and Baluchistan. 4 million people are being systematically deprived of economic development by the Islamic Republic. This is an issue that needs to be investigated, interrogated by all those. And I know there are distinguished individuals here whose business has been to investigate these matters and get to the truth. I believe there are very specific actions that need to be taken about this issue, needs to be opened up, and all those who have participated in creating this image that there is cooperation in fighting narcotics must take shared responsibility in what has happened. An old friend of mine used to say, truth fears no questions. I think it's important that the truth is investigated and is found. And as for the future, I'd like to suggest a call for action on two fronts. Number one, fully investigating this 2001 report by the United States Department of State independently to see if there is any truth about this intentional deprivation of economic development for the people of Sistan and Baluchistan. And number two, a personal experience is the basis for the next call. When we went to Afghanistan, we had successes, we had failures, mostly failures, but we had a few good things that happened there. One of the best things that happened there was the United States Geological Survey. It's an institution that finds treasures on the ground and natural resources, found that there is more than $3 trillion of precious metals and other rare metals, rare earth material under the soil in Afghanistan, which could be used for development of the country. Same thing needs to happen for Iran's Sistan and Baluchistan. It's important. Whether the United States Geological Survey is encouraged to do that or by law is allowed to do that, I'm not sure. what it takes to do that, but it needs to be done. What hasn't happened in Sistan and Baluchistan must happen as soon as possible. There is a generational window that's closing. Iran has a very young population, but this population is getting old fast. And the number of people who work, and the number of people who need to be supported by the government are not in balance. Once that window is closed, it's very difficult to turn back the clock. That's not how economics for generations work. I like to finish by saying that there is injustice today in Sistan and Baluchistan. And if anyone is asking, what's in it for me? Why do I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to join distinguished speakers here at this very timely conference? It's because it's important, because we all carry that responsibility. I've said this before, I would say it again. Until injustice is corrected, we're all from Sistan, we're all from Baluchistan, we're all Kurds, we're all part of the oppressed people in Iran, who some have been intentionally deprived of their economic development in those regions. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to stay. If there are any questions, I can answer to the best of my ability.
I'm very grateful. Thank you. For the sake of everyone here and watching us, Bijan very kindly shared me the report that he's mentioned in his talk, the 2001 paper. And it reads like a press release for the Islamic Republic. There's no mention of the executions. There's no mention of the imprisonment for drug offenders in Iran or drug addicts. It just reads as if it's a love affair between the US administration at the time and the Islamic Republic. It's bizarre. We will share it on our website since the report is in the public domain, so people can read it. And once we get a chance to come back to question and answers, hopefully we can discuss it further. But thank you very much again for staying up and for being with us and staying with us until the end of the panel. Thank you. I'm going to quickly move on to our next speaker, Nasser Walidei, who's the chair of the Balochistan People's Party. And he has a very important title to his talk, which will then bring us to why we have the two esteemed gentlemen on either side of me. Nasser's paper is called Crimes Against Humanity or Inconsequential Killings. Thank you. 10 minutes. Or I may just give you a little bit more time because other people have had a couple of more minutes, but not much more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Royan. Thank the association for arranging this meeting for us all. And I thank also the other groups that are here. Well, thank you very much. As you said, actually, I think I was thinking more about the titling my presentation to the secret genocide. But as you know, the genocide has a very big kind of consequence, and it is something is even the killing of the Jews by the Hitler was not considered genocide at the time. It was based on the people that were convicted. Mostly it was because of the crime against humanity, or the crime against humanity. I cannot say anything about that one here, but we have the esteemed panelists who would maybe describe what does it mean, but at least it's something that even if it doesn't have any convention, but it's what's used internationally. But what I see, my experience here is about the Baloch situation, where murdering Baloch is inconsequential. It's because there is no reaction from international community. As Simeon mentioned, it's not mentioned much in the Iranian media as it should be. Just this, since the Gaza war, anything that happens in the world, any kind of change in Iran, year changing, even the European year changing, international year changing, or presidential change, you can see an increase of execution in Iran, but also in Balochistan. As I have seen it during this time that I've been active, even I have been politically active, but I have been working mostly in human rights, given that what's happening in Balochistan has been mostly to the United Nations. And I've been talking there, and I have been sitting in the panel with Ahmad Shahid and now Javid Rahman here too, and talking about Baloch situation. And even I have said that in the United Nations, I'm sorry to say that one, I say that a fact-finding mission to Iran too, that I feel there is a social chauvinism when it comes to Baloch. It's from part of the international community. And as I quoted here too from the Kissinger at the time when he was not foreign minister, but he was esteemed kind of respected within the government in the US and at the time of the President Kennedy. When he came to Baluchistan, it is the same thing, Baluchistan in Pakistan or Baluchistan in Iran, if you say it. And when they asked him about Baluchistan, what do you think what's happening in Baluchistan? He said, I would not even react if it slapped my face. And that's what the international community has been since then and before when it's come to Baluchistan situation. And I'm of an opinion that's what's happening in Baluchistan is a kind of government policy. It was not defined by this government, Islamic Republic of Iran. It was defined during the Pahlavi government. And even we can see it during the Qajar government. Mass killing of Baluchistan has been part of the kind of armed attacks on Baluchistan from the Qajar time, and it is continuing. And you can see it even sometimes in literature in Iran. That's somehow acceptable to kill. And that's something that we have to deal with, because otherwise this will continue. We know there are forces in Iran always using, as we always talk about, territorial integrity of Iran, and this used to kill people. This is not used to make people that you come together. We should be one people. It's used to kill people. And when we hear Iran territorial integrity, it means that there is a bullet coming towards me. I would be excused for anything. Just say that why I'm being killed, they say, well, you are the separatist. If I say why my language is not respected, they say, well, then you are most likely separatist, you should be killed. And that's what being used. And that's when we hear this word is a killing. It's a human rights situation here. So we have to emphasize on that one. When it comes to Baluchistan, when there's Howeida, that's why I'm saying it's not something new. That's historical and it's going on. And that's why we are very much careful to see the next government is not going to continue with same policies that Pahlavi had and this regime has. So that's one of our reasons that we when talk to the people, we want a kind of a positive coalition, not a negative coalition based on only saying that we overthrow the dictatorship. Okay, we overthrow the dictatorship, what will happen? Then come Raza Pahlavi and then come Khomeini. So we do not want the next time to be the same thing. We don't mind the name would be Raza Pahlavi or something else, but should be democratic and it should not be something that is killing people. I'm not saying that this Raza Pahlavi or that Raza Pahlavi. I'm not talking about persons, but for us it's very important because at the time, for instance, when they asked Howeida, why you not develop this region? He said, why we should do that? It is if these people happen to live in a geopolitical situation, important region, why they should get benefit from that? They should be moved from here. And that was a long-time prime minister in Iran for about almost 2 decades. And Khalat Bari, which is the Pahlavi, always talk about Abbas Khalat Bari as there, I don't know. Things like the Jawad Zarif, he was foreign minister in Iran. And when he was asked about the Baloch, he said, well, we always think the Baloch will try to gain their independence one day. So it's obviously we have to keep them backward, weak, disunited politically. And that's been the policy of the Pahlavi, that Baluchistan should be backward. And when you see that Baloch doesn't have a school, there is no road, and we are somehow not represented in media. We are not represented in bureaucracy in Iran. It has been planned from the before. It's not something that has happened in a vacuum. We don't like to work. No, we are trying. If you go to the same Baloch family, part of the Baloch family that have moved to the Gulf region because of the separation again. They are ministers. They are the head of the army. They are diplomats. But in Iran, as you said, Simon mentioned, there is for instance, only one Baloch, Khatam Narwi, have been Baluchistan governor, and he was from Kerman region of Baluchistan. And one thing I have to say here, when it's come to suppressing Baloch, there has been some possibility for the Shias, but the part of the Baluchistan where the Shias live is currently in Muslim Kerman and to some extent Baluchistan. And here Mr. Eid Mohammed was mentioned. Eid Mohammed was not the biggest smuggler. He was just kind of a person who fought against the regime. Maybe he was involved, but he was not big smuggler. And he was a child when his father was killed in front of him by the regime. So that's why he went to the mountain and fought against the regime. He killed some revolutionary guard, he killed some security forces. I'm not saying that he did a good thing, but you can imagine a young man when he's in about 10, 12 years, and you can kill his father, his all the family, and there was left for him. So you have to understand the situation in Balochistan when people like Malik Rigi come and people like Eid Mohammed come, and then of course there is misunderstanding about them too. We are against all kind of use of force by the Baloch or by the government. But I think here we are going to have to understand that the killing that's happening in Balochistan, it has consequences sometimes in the form of those, but at least as we can see now, the Baloch struggle always have been civil resistance, never have been armed, and this note showing, particularly in Maki Mosque, as I was saying, the Maulavi Abdul Hamid is leading that one. And we are proud to say that we as the Balochistan People's Party have worked on that one to make sure that Balochistan becomes secular. When Maulavi Abdul Hamid has said about Taliban or supporting Raisi, we have been critical on those. We have been the group that only political group in Balochistan that have said that that's strong. And Maulavi Abdul Hamid being a wise man, a man who knows something. When he have heard these things, he never have blamed us to be wrong. He have accepted this kind of thing. So he's a kind of leader that listens to the people, and that's what's important. For me is to say that one here, that to emphasize that one, what I see in Balochistan is a crime against humanity, and according to the articles of the Rome Statutes, and I think it's very important for the international community to recognize that one, and I think it's very important for us to be recognized, because this much killing in Balochistan that's happening, when you see that each year we see and this has been reported by Amnesty International too, that in 1991, for instance, and you can see these things that, for instance, in 2010 there was demonstration, 2009, actually demonstration then started also in Balochistan. Many people forget that one, that demonstration before even the presidential election happened in that region. And the regime, even we have the reports, the regime at that time blamed our party and other parties for instigating those things, and they said that we have got money from the French government. I've gone and met the French, I don't know, spy service, but I never knew any French spy service. At least I've heard that CIA leader or the Mossad's leader, but never heard anything about the French intelligence service. But they said we have met him, we have got money to instigate those demonstrations in Zahedan. Actually, demonstration happened first in Zahedan and then after the election in other parts of Iran. But Balochistan, of course, was not involved in the saying that Mousavi should come or Ahmadinejad. But then again, when the demonstration started in Balochistan, they arrested 150. In Tehran, they arrested more. But the regime did not execute many in Tehran at that time. They executed 19 people in one day in Balochistan. And there was a bomb explosion in Zahedan. They arrested, they didn't arrest anyone, but on the 19th April and on 31st April, they killed 3 people, hanged them in the street in Zahedan. And then they said they had been planning and they did this explosion. But they were, at the time, were in prison. Simply because they were Baloch, they were executed and they were blamed for this explosion. But these things never have mentioned in any cases that how regime is doing these things. Why is finding this kind of situation where you just go and find somebody in the prison and kill? And that's what we have to mention, I think, in those reports. And I think I remember once I was in Mr. Javed Rahman, we had a session, and I mentioned the problem sometimes is that, for instance, this reports that's written by the United Nations or other institution or Amnesty International, even once in a Siemens program in Cheshmandas, I had a clash. Sima, yes, sorry, with Siemens, with Amnesty International, and then I mentioned Amnesty International has been silent for decades about Balochistan. And after that one that I criticized Amnesty International, they came and wrote something, but it was the same report that 10 years ago they had done. They only changed some word. They didn't even give it 10 minutes to change to do a new job. The same that former kind of person that are working on in Amnesty International, because I have all those reports in my computer and I printed them out too. So I know when it's come, I remember it's the same report. The same report, it's nothing changed. it shows that they do not give it time to Baluch. And that's the problem. And we see those reports that are published by the special rapporteurs and by other groups. We see that there is, as I was saying here, 75% of the execution and arrests are happening in Kurdistan and Baluchistan. But then in those reports, 90% or sometimes 95% is about Tehran or people that with privilege. Not the people like the Baluchistan. They only mention maybe in one paragraph. Actually, this time I have to thank Mr. Javigram that the last one gave more space to the national minorities and the Baluch. But previously, there has been maybe mentioned in one paragraph, not more than that. But sometimes just say that many of those that have been executed as ethnic minorities. But that's not enough. And then regime sees that's inconsequential. There is no consequence for it to kill Baluch. And that's why whenever he feels to show that it's strong, it's effective, and they use that we are effective. And then they go and find some Baluch and kill him. And beside that, there is extrajudicial killings in Balochistan. Every week, there are 2, 3, 4, 5 people are killed. Sometimes one day, 3, 4, 5 people are killed. And I just thank you very much. And when I wanted to make sure that when we say about Sistan, Baluchistan, it is what's happening in Baluchistan. It's not only in Sistan, Baluchistan. It's a part of the Hormozgan region. The same thing is happening. Part of the Baluchistan, which is in Kerman, the same thing is happening. Even I can say it's worse. Baluch who are living in those provinces will not only suffer from the countrywide separation, but they even suffer from a provincial separation too. People Baluchin living in Kerman are in worse situation than Baluchistan, and the same thing for the Baluch in Hormozgan. So we have to think about that one. When we talk about Baluchistan, it's not only Sistan and Baluchistan. There are the Baluch people there also suffering, and the same level. The regime do not discriminate us because we live in different provinces, even if it's oppress us more on those provinces. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very valuable contribution. We hear you. The reason that we are organizing the second conference on Baluchistan is because we hear you and we want to be able to carry the voice forward. Hopefully from the 2 next presentations that we hear, maybe we will be able to address the consequence issue. We've heard many times about the number of executions, disproportionately high executions, the brutality, the violence against the Iranian Baloch people that have been under for years, but specifically in the last year, it's been evident to the world. We've been watching it. And we're very privileged and honored to have Professor Payo Mahabon with us, whose expertise is this very question of assessing crimes against humanity. Professor Payo Mahabon is a professor of international law at Mercy College, University of Toronto, and he's also a special advisor to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court at The Hague. So we couldn't have a better placed person who can hear you and then say what we can do. And also, maybe Payo, you can tell us if what is happening in Baluchistan, if what they are, we've heard this morning and we will carry on hearing this afternoon, does constitute something like crimes against humanity. What are the ABCs? And then what can we do? I'm sure that you will have many answers for us. Okay, very much. Yes. Oh, okay.
زش هستیم برای نجات اقتصاد کشور. ما یک ایزش هستیم برای جلوگیری از فقیرتر شدن مردم. ما یک ایزش
دوستان عزیز صبح همگی بخیر. از جناب دکتر لاجوردی و سرکار خانم دکتر کاشفی بسیار سپاسگزارم که به من افتخار شرکت این پنل با همکاران گرامی رو دادن. I will be speaking today on the 75th anniversary of the adoption on December 9th, 1948, of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. In fact, the first human rights instrument to be adopted by the United Nations, as my distinguished colleague, Professor Rahmani, also referred to. And the following day, on December 10th, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted. And it's important to think 75 years later about why these instruments emerged and what relevance they have for the struggles that we have today, such as the one of the violent persecution against the Baluchi people in Iran. And when we think about crimes against humanity and genocide, we have to begin with the premise that the Holocaust did not begin in the gas chambers. It began with words. It began with the dehumanization and demonization of other human beings because of their identity and nothing more. And that dehumanization and demonization is what is always necessary for mass murder. It is always necessary to deny and disregard the dignity of others in order to justify treating them with such extreme violence. And I say this because some of us may think, what can we do sitting here in London for the people in Zahedan and the others who are suffering these crimes? And it's important for us to know that the beginning of the journey towards justice is the transformation of our culture, is to change the conversation that we have with each other. Turning to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I also think it's important, following the presentation that we have just heard, to speak about the relationship between territorial integrity and human rights, because whenever we speak about the rights of minorities, immediately there is an accusation that we are somehow promoting secession, we are promoting the disintegration of the territorial integrity of Iran, which is nothing but a cynical pretext to justify the continuation of violent repression. Human rights tell us that human dignity is universal, that every human being deserves to be treated with dignity and with respect. And in that regard, our message is simple: Iran for all Iranians. Iran برای تمام شهروندان ایران بر اساس عدالت، بر اساس کرامت انسانی. It is as simple as that. Now, crimes against humanity emerged first in the Charter of the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg, which was established to prosecute the Nazi leaders upon the conclusion of the Second World War. And there are two important historical lessons here. First of all, crimes against humanity was necessary because many of the crimes of the Nazis were against their own nationals. And in 1945, international law did not yet recognize universal human rights. So it was necessary to create a new category which recognized that some crimes are so shocking to the conscience of humankind that they must be prosecuted irrespective of the nationality of the victims. That is the first point. The second point, which is important, is that at the end of the Second World War, some, including Prime Minister Winston Churchill, Chairman Joseph Stalin, argued that the Nazis should simply be lined up and executed upon the capture of Berlin, whereas it was the Americans who insisted that there must be justice, there must be a process of denazification. The German people must understand the truth and the reality of the crimes that have been committed if there is any chance for a post-war democratic transformation of Germany. Both of those lessons are essential when we look at the question of crimes against humanity, and most important, the question of accountability for those crimes. Crimes against humanity, in simple terms, is defined in Article 7 of the Statute of the International Criminal Court as a widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population through means such as murder, torture, rape, and other forms of sexual violence, deportation, but also persecution on religious, ethnic, and other grounds, which includes the discriminatory denial of fundamental human rights. That, in short, is the description of crimes against humanity. And it doesn't take much imagination to understand that what the Islamic Republic has been doing for the past 45 years as a matter of state policy, is to incite hatred and violence against all manner of ethnic, religious, and other minorities. But the real question is not whether these atrocities qualify as crimes against humanity or not. The question is, how are we going to achieve justice, given the fact that the judicial system of Iran, rather than dispensing justice, itself is an instrument of injustice and repression. One can hardly turn to the revolutionary courts, which have been responsible for mass executions from the very early days of the revolution, in order to arrive at justice. Well, we have the International Criminal Court in The Hague. The problem is that Iran, predictably, is not a party to that statute, because why would it recognize the jurisdiction of a court that would turn around and prosecute its entire leadership? The only option is for the United Nations Security Council to refer the situation to the International Criminal Court, acting under Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter. Once again, we look at the reality of global politics and its cynicism, where human rights and justice are always subordinated to geopolitical calculations, the exercise of the veto power by the Russian Federation, by China, and what have you, which makes that option also difficult to achieve. We do, however, have now, after many years of struggle, the United Nations fact-finding mission for Iran, which is documenting these crimes, including the violent persecution against the people of Baluchistan. And at the very least, we must document these crimes. We must establish the historical truth, because as George Santayana famously said, what we forget, we are condemned to repeat again. At the very least, the people of Iran must know what is happening to our brothers and sisters in Baluchistan. But beyond that, I think we need to start thinking about what transitional justice will look like in Iran. And my faith is less with International Criminal Court, where I have the privilege of being a special advisor to the prosecutor, and it is more with the courts of the future democratic Iran. Why can we not start thinking about what a democratic transition would look, and how perhaps a special court for Iran, established specifically for the prosecution of the top leadership for their individual criminal responsibility for crimes against humanity, could be an essential ingredient, not simply in a shifting of power from one group of tyrants to another, but a genuine transformation which will finally allow the people of Iran to achieve freedom based on equality. I will stop there and thank you once again for having invited me. And perhaps, since in Iran we love poetry, I will share the famous poem of Rumi, who says that there is love in every religion, but love has no religion. And that basic empathy, that basic sense of compassion, feeling the suffering of others, is the beginning and end of our journey out of this catastrophe to a better future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've answered some very important questions there, and all within your 10 minutes. You still had a minute left, so we'll give you a prize. Thank you. We have had, thinking about transitional justice, the future of Iran, it's good to just remember that we had Iran Tribunal and we had the Sabah Tribunal, which were people's courts, thinking about the future and all of that. And the judges and the international panel that sat at both Iran Tribunal and Sabah Tribunal, looking at the events that happened during the massacres of the summer during the 1980s, and also what happened in November 2019 in Iran. Both panels at the end, both judges, people who sat in decision making, it was People's Tribunal, both said crimes against humanity, and it's been documented. And I'm happy to say that our the Baluch civil society are also documenting all of this, and we're doing all that we can. And as you say, it's so important to remember this and to document it now for future, and to have this on record that people have heard. It's really important to share the stories, as we heard with Fariba, because that keeps it alive. It's very real then. It's not just statistics. We keep hearing about so many numbers of executions and extrajudicial killings, but when you hear these very personal stories, it makes it very real, and it's shared pain with all Iranians. It's not just the question of it being the Iranian Baloch people. The laws and the practice of law in Iran is such that every single Iranian is persecuted to some level if they don't belong to that particular clique. Dr. Rahman, we turn to you. You've heard some criticism of the United Nations. I know you're not responsible for what happens everywhere else. We're all grateful for your time and efforts on part of Iran. The previous conference that we had the privilege of hearing you in October in Florence on right to life and death penalty. We also mentioned crimes against humanity, and based on what's been happening in Iran. So it's very good to have more your thoughts specifically now on Baluchistan. We touched a little bit on what happened in Baluchistan in that context a month or so ago, but to concentrate on it. I'm very grateful for your time.
Thank you. Can I follow my good
Yes,
friend
please do.
Professor Pam and
Yes.
take the
They'll put the mic on you.
oh, thank you. Okay, good afternoon. Thank you very much for this generous invitation. I'll just begin by 2 points. One is that I am the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran. I'm an independent expert, so I am not employed by the United Nations, but that gives me an advantage that I can have an independent voice. I can be critical. I can say what I believe is the situation and not necessarily follow, a particular organizational view. So I think that's a positive sign, and I'll be happy to address any issues that pertain to my mandate and not specifically to the UN as such. The second point, which many of you may know or may not know, that I come from Pakistan. And we also have a lot of issues regarding ethnic and religious minorities. In particular, the Baloch issue has been very central to the various political and diplomatic and legal issues that have arisen since the creation of Pakistan. And it's a traumatic history that we've had in terms of what has happened to Pakistan. But I would say that the issue of Balochistan is very close to my heart, also because I come from Pakistan. So with these 2 points, I want to focus particularly and perhaps to address some of the criticism made earlier on the issue of Balochistan and human rights and how we perceive the subject going forward. So to begin with, the Baloch people have been both historically as well as in contemporary times discriminated, persecuted, and targeted by the Iranian authorities. And as many of you are aware, that their most fundamental rights have been completely violated with impunity. These violations have been evident for decades. The repression, persecution, and rampant discrimination remains a systemic and systematic state policy. Tragically, the Baloch people are also targets of what we all know, arbitrary deprivation of the right to life at the hands of state and security agencies. In my report to the United Nations Human Rights Council in March of this year, I had highlighted the reported serious and substantial crimes in international law including crimes against humanity having taken place in Iran. And just to remind you what I said, I read out a paragraph. I said that severe violations of the rights to life, liberty, and security of person, the right not to be subject to torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, the right not to be subjected to rape and other forms of sexual violence, and the right not to be subjected to arbitrary arrest or detention, have been documented since the start of the protests as part of an apparent policy instigated at the highest level of the state to crush the protests at all costs. And I go on to say that the scale and gravity of these violations point to the possible commission of international crimes, notably the crimes against humanity of murder, imprisonment, and forced disappearances, torture, rape, and sexual violence and persecution. So these were my observations to the Human Rights Council. And when I made this statement was in the context of obviously the women life freedom movement, but it was also in the context of the targeting of ethnic, linguistic, and religious minorities. And in making this statement, I was also referring to the crimes against humanity that were specifically reported to have been committed against the Baloch people. And in my report, I have made several references to the targeting of the Baloch people. And since the start of this movement, there have been many instances, many examples of the systematic state killings which targeted the Balochis. And the most horrific one, which I also referred in my report, is about the brutality and torture that was unleashed on the 30th of September 2022, which was also the deadliest of incidents on recorded documentation since the start of the protest last year. I don't want to go into too much detail. I think you're aware of what happened on the 30th of September. Safe to say that the Balochis were simply demonstrating on that day peacefully to express solidarity with the protests and to demand accountability for the reported rape of a 15-year-old girl by the police commander in the province. As people gathered outside the police station across the road to protest, security forces fired live ammunition, metal pellets, and tear gas at protesters and bystanders from the police station and rooftops of nearby houses. A majority of the victims were shot deliberately in the head, heart, neck, and torso, demonstrating a clear intention to kill or to seriously harm peaceful protesters or individuals. According to a very conservative estimate, and the numbers have changed since then, we reported that at least 93 people were killed on that day. Tragically, the Balochis have continued to be the victims of these crimes, including, as I say, crimes against humanity. The levels of killings, torture, and brutality against the Balochis is truly shocking. I have also noted in my last report to the Human Rights Council that more than half of the total number of persons killed since the start of the protest, that is the Women Life Freedom Movement, are from the Baloch and Kurdish populated provinces. Children from Iran's Baloch and Kurdish minorities constituted at least 63% of the recorded victims. I reported to the council that as of December last year, at least 130 Balochis had been killed by Iranian security forces. And now I'm receiving reports that in the first 9 months of 2023, that is this year, at least 90 persons have been murdered extrajudicially by the Iranian security forces, including at least 22 fuel carriers. The Balochis are disproportionately targeted and executed within the Iranian criminal justice system, with this exercise and disproportionate application evident in their convictions, primarily on drug-related or security-related offenses. In my report to the Council earlier this year, I noted that at least 147 Balochis, while representing only 2 to 6% of the total Iranian population, were reportedly executed, representing at least 30% of all executions, and more than half were executed on drug-related charges. It is reported that in 2023, by the end of September, that is in the first 9 months of 2023, already at least 118 Balochis have been executed. The numbers, I have no doubt, would be much higher because the state does not give us any accurate numbers and it's difficult to have precise numbers. In addition, as I've observed and already reported throughout my mandate, the Baloch people's right to life and fundamental human rights and well-being are consistently and totally undermined systematically because they are left in poverty, they are rendered vulnerable to man-made or environmental calamities, and politically and economically and socially, they are so disempowered that they do not have a voice. And this is all in addition to being subjugated to state oppression, violence, and targeting. Just a few brief comments, if I may say, on the broader and the disturbing picture on Sistan and Baluchistan province. Now, this province has already been referred to many times, remains one of the most impoverished provinces in the country. The vast majority of the population lives below the national poverty line. It is also the case that the Balochis, mostly as Sunni Muslims, face intersectional discrimination and persecution, both as ethnic minorities as well as Sunni Muslims. In one of my first missions that I completed as a special rapporteur, I think that was in 2019, I heard firsthand accounts describing the basic infrastructure within Sistan and Balochistan province as minimal, with even no running water. There was no facilities at all that were available to the people of the province. I also received information that in the absence of educational facilities throughout the region, many of the inhabitants needed to travel to Zahedan, the provincial capital, for post-primary education and hospital care. A lack of official documentation or proof of citizenship has affected the right to education quite substantially for the predominantly Baloch Sunni population of this province. According to information that I received, this lack of documentation appears to be rooted in a lack of historical interaction with state institutions. And even by the official governmental admissions, thousands of children in the province continue to lack identification and therefore are deprived of their fundamental human right to education. So I will end by reiterating my message that the Baloch people, the Balochis, deserve better. Together with the civil society, human rights defenders, journalists, environmental activists, the international community must dedicate all its energies in protecting and, importantly, promoting the rights of the Balochi people. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I apologize, I didn't introduce you properly at the beginning, but I thought everybody knows you and I got so excited and mindful of time. I am very mindful of time. We've only got 15 minutes. Just to sum up what we've heard this morning, we've heard a lot about how the Iranian Baloch people are underrepresented in news reporting or in general attention of reporting on human rights situation in Iran by other groups, by Iranians. We all also heard about that it's a shared pain as an Iranian that we have, but the Balochis in particular are more persecuted than the rest, if such a thing is possible. Just a few statistics: 67% of the Baloch population is below the age of 30. This is according to the latest statistics published by Iran itself. They've also carried out a multidimensional poverty index survey in Iran. And again, Baluchistan, instead of being at the bottom of everything, is top of this multi-dimensional poverty index. It is top for not having enough hospitals, top in not having enough schools, top in not having any kind of equitable access to things that you would expect a dignified human being to have. So the Islamic Republic is aware, according to its own surveys, its own calculations, its own reporting, it is aware. And you hear a lot about projects that they have of the region, that they are demonstrations rather than actual projects. They come, they fill themselves, starting something, and then when the cameras go away, that's the end of the project, and the money's pocketed by a few. It's very difficult to sum up the pain and the suffering of a group of people who share the same land borders and who, as you said, in the name of maintaining territorial integrity, are then persecuted and killed. Simonon, I'm going to come to you and say, in the 10 minutes that we have, are there any questions that you want to ask before I go to the audience?
Why me? No, I'm happy to give this.
Are there any questions from anyone here in the audience? Any questions? No. Do you have any questions? Yes, Negidon, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for the time you spent and yeah, fantastic talks you did. It's just for everyone on the panel. So it seems like, especially Tayo, maybe it's for you. It seems like it's quite difficult to take legal actions on crime against humanity in Baluchistan. Is there other avenues that as activists and supporters of the cause in Baluchistan we can take to support the community and creating a legal framework in international law to help the community and take this further?
Thank you for your question. Maybe I will repeat one thing I've said and add something to it, which is documentation is extremely important. Having credible, typically contemporaneous documentation, witness testimony. The Iran Human Rights Documentation Center, which we founded about 20 years ago, has done this work. There are a number of other NGOs. And I would say to our Baluch brothers and sisters who I know are active in this field, that getting this documentation through networks of credible, reliable sources of information, and then transmitting it to the right people, whether it's other Iranian human rights organizations, the UN Special Rapporteur, the UN fact-finding mission also, which is very important because they will prepare a report which will be tabled to the Human Rights Council. Beyond that, I think publicizing the evidence is also very important. It goes back to the Iran Tribunal, which we established 10 years ago, and the broadcasting of the testimony of about 100 witnesses brought to life the reality of what had happened in 1988 in the mass executions, about which most people in Iran had no idea. For them, this was a glorious decade of the revolution, and then all of a sudden, Mada Esmat from Sweden comes with a photograph of her 4 children who were executed, and goes back to the power of empathy. I could say something as a professor, but Mother Esmat's voice probably awakened thousands more people to the reality of these horrors than anything which I could have said. So I think that diffusing that awareness of the historical truth is very important in creating a democratic momentum and culture. But I want to turn to maybe a couple of other quick points. The Hamid Nouri trial in Sweden probably would not have happened without the Iran Tribunal, without people becoming aware of what transpired and even being given some incentive to provide information. And some of you may know who actually exposed Hamid Nouri and lured him to Sweden. I won't get into that, except that we jokingly say he's still waiting for 2 beautiful Swedish women at the airport who were going to take him on a cruise in the Baltics. That's what he thought would be greeting him when he arrived in Stockholm, instead of handcuffs and prosecution. But universal jurisdiction prosecutions are very important, but for that you need documentation. You need to identify individuals who are responsible for the killings in Zahedan, not just as a loose accusation, but credible evidence that a prosecutor in Canada, Sweden, the UK could use if we are alerted to the presence of an individual on this territory. And I would end by saying that the momentum of the Iranian diaspora in forcing a change in policies is very important. Just recently, Canada began the first of many deportation proceedings against officials of the Islamic Republic. In this case, the Deputy Interior Minister during the massacres of Aban, who's living happily in Canada, but who's now facing deportation. And the government has a list of many, many others. And we know Canada is one of the favorite locations for them to launder their dirty money and to live happily without any consequence. So another reason why documentation is important is even if you can't have a prosecution, you can ensure that people are deported rather than being welcomed with open arms.
Thank you.
Roya,
Yes,
if we have time,
you want to add to this?
just to Bijan Kian's input on Iran and drug channels. Just 1 minute, is it? Okay. I don't know if Mr. Kian is still online. I hope. I just want to do a comment if he can hopefully respond back to this. He talked. Thank you. He talked about the channel of drug transportation and trade from Baluchistan from east to Kurdistan in west. I have a doubt on that because why a regime has the control of entire 1.6 million square kilometer of the country for almost 4 decades and more, why they need that channel while they have every corner of Iran as a proper channel of drug and military and money launderings and all of the business development they have, while Kurdistan is harder for them than the Shiite southern border in Basra region or even Persian Gulf. Easily they can access all the way to Syrian border. I wish you could explain how this information is coming about and documentation.
I just have a quick question, more like a guidance, since we have you here and we have human rights activists, Human Rights Institute, in presenting to you, what kind of credible documentation would enable you to then question or include in your reports? What sort of information? How would you like it to be verified? I mean, I know it's very difficult to get any information out of Iran, and human rights activists work really hard to find out the names of the people who've been executed or who've disappeared or who've been victims of torture. What sort of evidence can be presented to you and how can it be presented to you? First of all, to enable this documentation that is so important that Dr. Nahawan also mentioned, but from your perspective as someone who then does the reporting and then carries on, as an independent expert, what would enable you to carry that voice forward?
Yeah. Thank you. You see, that's an important question. And ever since I joined this mandate in 2018, one of the key questions I had was about Balochistan, because I hardly was receiving any information of what is going on in Iranian Balochistan. I'm well aware of the situation in Pakistan. We have very serious issues. And I was always asking my contacts, can I get in touch with a civil society based in Balochistan or working elsewhere where they could give me verified information? And it has been a big struggle, you see, and that partly would explain, if you look at my reports or reports of my predecessors, that we haven't been able to do justice to Balochistan, to the issues of Balochistan. So I reached out to many organizations, and they were consistently saying to me that, look, it is very difficult, people in Balochistan. There are issues about communication, education, transmission, access to individuals. So all of them have been a difficulty. Now, in terms of the, the information that we want all forms of information. I want to talk to individuals who are victims, who are survivors. I want to talk to civil society activists. I must say that there isn't that that wealth of information, if I can call it, coming from Balochistan. So that is one avenue. Other information is obviously very important, such as documentary evidence or video evidence or real evidence, as we call it, of what is going on. We can also issue press releases and communications. I dare say that we haven't had many communications focused on Balochistan. And for that, we need individuals. So, for example, when victims say that this has happened to us, and they actually consent to having their name mentioned or explicitly complaining to the government, you see. So that is one big issue that, when there are victims, they are rather reluctant to approach us to say, okay, can we make an official complaint? The other, I think, significant issue is that Balochistan has a lot of pervasive issues, like, for example, developmental concerns, economic concerns. There are environmental concerns, and I would like a more focus from the civil society on these issues, because how can we address the issue of, let's say, environmental catastrophe that's taking place in Balochistan when we are not getting the requisite information? What needs to be done? Similarly, on the issue of this denial of right to education, what needs to be done? I mean, we need activism. See, we need people on the ground. And I often struggle to reach out to people who are based in Balochistan. And the reason why I was able to report to the Human Rights Council earlier this year was that the media got quite heavily involved. And actually, the movement was so strong that the international community could not but focus on Balochistan. It was one of the most severest forms of repression. And therefore, we had a lot of information coming from, for example, the Western media, which we could then, which we could then relay in terms of our own reporting. So I think there needs to be a lot more interest from the civil society, relevant stakeholders, from journalists, human rights defenders on such a crucial province and on such a grave situation that exists in Balochistan right now.
Thank you very much. So basically, you're after documented evidence, verified in a sense that it's two different sources that tell the same story, the same account, and then you'll be able to put the information together.
Because every time we reach out for for information, and in some cases that we get a lot of information. You see, some civil society or relevant stakeholders are very active. Some organizations are very active who are involved in Iran. But Balochistan is still quite at the back end of that kind of information. So we want more activism, basically. And I can see that there are real issues because deliberately the province has been left neglected. There are civil society not so active. I think there might be linguistic hurdles, cultural hurdles, but we want to know more. I mean, I don't know how you can assist us in that.
Well, it's sort of a security issue.
Yeah,
People are very afraid of showing their face or sharing their names.
Yeah.
We were, Fereydoon, who will be speaking in the afternoon panel, and her husband had been documenting information from Iran, and we wanted to show some of those testimonies today. But there was such fear of them then being recorded and then staying sort of available for anyone to see, that we decided, well, we don't want to endanger their lives further than what's happened. So the security issue is something. So we've decided not to share
the testimonies, but we will collate and provide you with the
And
information.
definitely, and if I can just add that, you see, I have received some documentary evidence, some videos. But I know that a lot more atrocities have taken place, particularly since last year, September. So we really need more evidence, victims' testimonies, but also, what happened to people when they were shot and, wounded. Where did they get the treatment? Were they, a lot of people were afraid, so they didn't, whatever hospitals.
Well, I'm
they were.
sorry you missed the parts, you
Yeah,
won't be joining us
yeah,
in the afternoon.
yeah.
We will hear about
Yeah,
that. We've
yeah.
got testimonies.
Yeah,
Fereydoon has, we've got 110 people that they've verified their identity and they've worked with them and they've actually assisted with exactly that issue.
Yeah.
They couldn't access healthcare because of the fear of going to hospital and being shot,
Yeah.
having a bullet in them.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
finding alternative.
And if I
healthcare.
may just add, I'm pleased that we have activism in Geneva now,
Yes.
and we're very, very grateful. And I think we need to have more of that information. Like, really, you have to be very strong in activism and Baloch activism. So it of course it's about Iran, but it is about a very delicate region. So Balochis are also in Pakistan. There are Baloch people living in many parts of the world. So you have to reach out specifically on the Baloch issue, so that the world members of the Human Rights Council know specifically this issue. Today I would be very surprised if many are fully familiar. You see, if you go to reach out, let's say to the United Kingdom mission, if you say, okay, there's a Baloch issue, they might not be so familiar because, it takes time, see, and it takes activism. So I think there is a real need, and not just in Geneva, also in New York, in the General Assembly, because, whenever, the UN Special Rapporteurs are presenting their reports, but also reach out to the independent experts. So my mandate is there, but there are many others. So for example, extrajudicial killings, the Special Rapporteur on minorities, on torture. So this should be, a dedicated mission.
Yes.
Yeah. And of course, there are many other mechanisms, such as the United Nations Secretary General, the Universal Periodic Reviews. There are treaty mechanisms. So it's all about telling the world what is happening in Balochistan, how Balochi people are suffering.
So we need a better consolidated effort from the Baluch community itself and then the rest of us to facilitate.
Yeah, and it's not a criticism. It is just a suggestion if you take it.
But it's important to hear it from our experts as to what is needed, because then that will also guide the way forward. This afternoon, we will also hear about testimonies about environmental issues and education and added discrimination against women and girls, not just because of the laws, but because of the culture and the traditions and all of that. So what we have promised other UN SR experts is that during this coming week, we will translate everything and provide a report from the conference to them.
Yeah.
And we'll also
Very
do a
good.
copy so we can have it. So at least there's some documentation coming out of what we've heard today. I'm very mindful of the time.
Can I
very
just-
quickly because Pam has to go.
Okay, just 1 minute. And the question is for Mr. Rahman. During the first 2 years of your work as a UN official representative for Iran, we didn't hear much about you or from you. I guess it was mostly within the reports that you had in just about Iran, etc. But during the last 2 years, you had more media appearances. What changed your mind? And I'm asking this because possibly your mission is going to end very soon. I don't know whether you're going to renew it or not, but how we can approach the next UN reporter on Iran in order to get right from the beginning in the social media, in media, and being represented within our community.
It's a very important question, and it will take a very long time. But briefly, you see, when we, I started in July 2018, and there was an unfortunate passing of late Asma Jahangir.
Yes.
I took the mandate, and clearly the terms of the mandate we have to follow in terms of trying to orient ourselves as to what we can do to better promote and protect the rights of the people of Iran. So one of my first and still a very strong ambitions is to be allowed access to the country, you know. And I have been engaging with the Iranian authorities to actually give me that access, and that consumed quite a lot of time. There was a dialogue going on. We were trying, and we still try to have access. But you have to remember that during my mandate, so the first 2 years you mentioned, in 2020, we had the pandemic immediately concerning. So a lot of interruptions did take place, and we were juggling with a lot of issues. So 2018, I took over. We had this November 29 protest. It was devastating. Then trying to deal with the consequences of the pandemic, you know, complete shutdown. And over a period of time, it has come to pass that the situation has become so worsened that media campaigns are needed. And that's where I thought that, okay, now I need to, go further than what my mandate says. And I can assure you that the mandate is very sensitive. We have to protect the mandate, you see. And that has been at the forefront of my mind, that if I am too aggressive, and perhaps you're suggesting that, that will jeopardize the actual
You weren't
mandate.
aggressive during the last years. You were just more apparent.
Yeah, but that's your view, but that is not the view perhaps of all of the stakeholders, because they want a certain direction for this mandate. You have to look at where the mandate is. So I'm very happy to explain, but I think it's also a diplomatic channel that we have to adopt, and we have to be very careful in taking steps forward.
Thank you very much, everyone, for your time. I'm very grateful to my wonderful panel. Thank you for giving us your time this very important day. Bon voyage to Oslo. Take with you our love and support for our Mohammadi and her beautiful children who will be receiving the honor on her behalf. Thank you, everyone. We're going to have a break for an hour, and we'll be back here for 2 p.m. hopefully with no more technical difficulties. There's light lunch outside. Please drop them. Thank you. Come round. Cross it. Yeah, exodus. Yeah. I'll send you.
Sorry.
I'm Baluchi today. Everyone is on.
Merci. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Back
It's much big sense.
Thank you.
Recycling. So that man. Want to give a picture?